Hello, everyone. Yes, thank you for that introduction, Kat. I'm really excited for this panel. It gets to talk about lots of speculative tech and science and how that's going to impact media in the future, or maybe not. I mean, I think the question that I want everyone to keep in their back of their minds throughout this panel is how revolutionary is the shiny new technology of today or of even past years? Keep in mind, it was not so long ago that the shiny thing was NFTs and the metaverse, and we will talk about those, but we haven't talked about them as much perhaps this year, and that's interesting to reflect upon as well. So today, my esteemed panel is going to help me unpack all of these technologies. We have Dora Michail-Clendinnen from Ozone, you're the Chief Strategy Officer. We also have Sean Betts, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Omnicom Media Group, and Luke O'Connell, Head of Data and Technology at Danone. Thanks for being here. I wanted to start us off with perhaps the shiniest of all shiny things, which is AI. We've been talking about AI, feels like, nonstop for the past 15 months or so. Is it fair to assume that we all agree that AI will be revolutionary to some degree or another?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot my mic. I'm so sorry.
Oh, we can grab this one from Kat.
Right here.
Look at that.
Sorry, yes was my answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess the question I want to ask is, how revolutionary or transformative is it right now? Or are we still years off from realizing its full or even half potential? And perhaps, Luke, you can give a start with that.
Sure. I guess that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? So it reminds me a little bit of big data. So you remember we were talking about big data quite neurotically about 15 years ago, that it was going to absolutely transform everything that we did. And it took a long time for us to get there. We still haven't nailed it. So it's still something, it's still a journey and aspiration. We're starting to now get more technology to bring it together, which I think we'll touch on later with things like CDPs. But we're still not there. And we were talking a decade ago about this being the next biggest thing that's going to transform everything that we do. And it didn't for years and years and years. So I think there's a balance between what we're going to see as immediate results, and I think there's a lot in generative AI that can really transform the amount of resource that we're spending, the amount of ideation we're doing for personalization. But actually, in terms of the bigger AI piece of having AI eventually run our business and our brands, we're a long way off, thankfully, for all of us in the room. I think that's how I would kind of balance it.
Yeah, Sean, could you maybe elaborate, like, what's achievable for brands right now with AI? And generative AI, I suppose, specifically.
Yeah, I was going to say, generative AI is definitely having much more an impact on the creative side of marketing right now. And I think we're just starting to see the effects of that come through. We're seeing more and more campaigns using generative AI tools, and we're starting to see it impact on businesses' hiring decisions as well, which is the big thing that everyone's kind of worried about. But I do think new opportunities and new roles will spring up around it as well. So it's definitely the creative side of the business that is seeing the impact in the short term. But it will impact, I think, every part of marketing over time.
And Dora, I mean, what about from the publisher perspective? Because as I've done some reporting on this myself, it could completely upset the entire internet, let alone publishers within that ecosystem. So how are publishers sort of grappling with this new technology for themselves?
So I agree with Sean. Similarly, it will impact publishing in every aspect, and we'll see that accelerate over the next probably 3 to 5 years. I think it will be. If we're talking about revolutionary, it will be transformative for publishers, whether we're talking about how they actually publish, what it means for the journalism, what it means for monetization. There are fundamental areas that will change the way that publishing businesses work. That will include how journalists do their job, and it will accelerate the way that a publisher thinks about their subscriber base. Thinking about just simply the way that even today ChatGPT and Google Gemini will essentially, I think we've seen the peak of search referrals to publishers. I think we've seen the peak already. I think it will continue, the trend will continue to decline, and it will be accelerated it will be because of AI. And so that's going to just transform the way that publishers think about their audience and how they speak and reach their audience. So from that perspective, I think it's really fundamental.
So if we've seen the peak of search referral, I mean, that could seriously upset, I suppose, not just publishers' business, but anyone that has a website, really, could see a different type of traffic needing to come in. I mean, how do you respond to such a big transformation in the internet? I think, Dora, we talked about this previously. You mentioned that we could see a two-tier type of internet where, because of generative AI, you're going to get a whole lot of the long tail of just bad creative, bad writing, and then you might have still the quality people that are working, but are they able to make enough money to support themselves? That's kind of an open question, I suppose. Dora, do you want to jump in, though?
Yeah, I mean, at Ozone we talk about it as the premium web. There's lots of ways that you could describe what we mean by that. Published media, the premium web, quality media, quality websites, whatever it is. But it's exactly what you say, that there's very much where utility can be found, where entertainment, where people go to be informed, where they go to check the weather or check the football results, whatever it may be, where there's real utility. That's what we describe as the premium web. It's fact-based or it's entertaining or whatever it is. And then there's everything else. And so from that perspective, there's real opportunity and it's exciting for the premium web and those who qualify for that title, especially in the realms of monetization. And so I think that AI will absolutely accelerate and accentuate that progress towards the premium web.
Luke, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I think the premium question is going to be interesting. I think in the early days of generative AI, it's going to be quite easy to pull apart what's been handpicked and curated versus that AI is generated. But I think it's not going to be long before it becomes impossible to tell. And then it really becomes in terms of resource and kind of bums on the seats, it becomes the people that are able to train the language models, that are able to set the direction of the AI and create content that's worthwhile and meaningful versus actually them coming up with the premium content. So I think the roles will shift. In all of these things, we talk about resource, right? This is the question on everybody's mind. But actually, what you're getting for probably the same amount of people who are now just focused on training and developing AI is so much more content, so much more opportunity and capability. I mean, we've been talking about personalization for our brands. Again, this is another decade-long topic, and most businesses tried to do this quite early on, and they've really struggled because, do you know what? Creating 7, 8, 9 different copies of something is actually really tricky. So this now eliminates that and becomes, it's a pure creativity game. What do I want different personas to start seeing? What do I want my different brand experiences to look like?
Sean, I'm curious, we've talked a little bit about already the fact that the types of skills that are needed are likely going to change within the workplace. That includes brands, that includes media agencies. Should the industry be more aware or concerned to a higher degree, let's say, of job loss or replacement than is being admitted right now?
Yeah, I think...
Oh, Chris.
Bombshell.
Excuse me. That was... Sorry.
I'd say that the industry is kind of letting this happen to itself as opposed to kind of actively looking at how it wants to take on the technology and transform itself to take advantage of it. I think there's going to be a lot of new skills that are needed in the industry to take advantage of generative AI technology, and it's incumbent on us to train people in those skills and to hire different types of people into the industry that can take advantage of that technology. So that's one of the things that I'm kind of trying to push as much as I can, because I think overall there will be the same kind of volumes of people working in marketing. I just think the roles will be really different, the skills needed will be really different, and obviously the tools that we'll be using will be completely different, because all of the tools that we'll use will be generative AI tools fundamentally. Now, a lot of those things don't exist yet. There's a lot of building that needs to be done. That's going to take time. Cultural change in organisations takes time as well, so I don't think this is something that's going to happen overnight, but we talk a lot of time frames of 3 to 5 years when we're talking about generative AI right now, and that's what we've got to be thinking about. what are the types of skills we're going to need in our business in 3 to 5 years to take advantage of this? And I don't think anyone's really figured that out yet.
Well, whoever does is going to make a lot of money, I imagine. What about AI's role in terms of data privacy? I think, think about AI. AI is often used as a shorthand for, what used to be machine learning, which then was a shorthand for data science. I mean, ultimately, a lot of this comes down to data. What are ways in which AI can help get the most out of data while also respecting individuals' privacy? I know this is a concern for publishers because first-party data is increasingly important to them.
Absolutely, and I think you probably can't talk about this topic without talking about what happens to the third-party cookie in relation to the first-party cookie. Again, if you go back to this idea that there'll potentially be a two-tier internet, and the premium stuff is where all the first-party data is, the publisher is it? The publishers, the publishers and the brands are very much the custodians of this data, and it's incumbent on those brands and those publishers to build a relationship with their readers, with their listeners, with their consumers, to get consent, to use it properly, and to, if you think about all of that data that just within Ozone's publishers, there's so much data that we have, audiences that we can build, but all of that is done with publisher permission and with reader consent. And so we can funnel that in, and that's good input, and I think that's what's important. It's privacy compliant, good input into AI that can generate amazing insights, reporting, performance for brands, all of those things. So I think it's fundamental, again, to how privacy in the future looks.
There's a lot of data out there, and you can feed machines, AI, all that data, but eventually you might run out. So, Sean, what happens when you do run out? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about synthetic data, which is interesting.
So I think a lot of the big generative AI companies right now have stopped worrying about running out of data because these models have got so good that they can create their own data. So there was a lot in the press last year around how we're going to kind of run out of data to train these models in the next 2 to 3 years, but that's human data. And synthetic data gives us an infinite amount of it. And also, I'm not sure that training bigger and bigger models is actually the answer to getting to where everyone wants to get to, which is kind of general artificial intelligence. I think there's fundamental engineering that needs to be done that isn't just about the size of your data, and there's kind of different approaches as well that need to be taken to get there. So synthetic data is quite a new area. It's really, really interesting. I actually think that's the most interesting part of generative AI for marketing in the next couple of years, because I think it will transform how we look at consumers and insights, and even as far as being able to create kind of simulations of markets and test campaigns before they even go live. I think that's where this all kind of ends up for marketing. So that, for me, is the most exciting area of generative AI for marketing right now, and an area that we want to do a lot more kind of investment and research into.
And from a privacy perspective, if you generate your own data that looks like or acts like data that is real human data, I assume that could be helpful in that way as well. But you do surely run into the issue of, is the data as accurate as human data?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's going to be some use cases where the data has to be 100% accurate at an individual level, where synthetic data is not going to be the answer. But there are so many use cases in and around data for marketing that it doesn't need to be 100% accurate, and it doesn't need to be at an individual level. So I think, synthetic data can answer a lot of issues around privacy and confidentiality when it comes to sharing data.
And I think that we also need to be careful of bias. So there's synthetic data can be really, really useful, and it can really help us because the amounts of studies that we do and rely on tiny pools of people. So we'll confidently walk into a room and tell marketers that actually, with 92% accuracy, this is what people think. And actually, if somebody says to me, Luke, what's the sample size here? Then that's the last question I want to get because, this is that, yeah. So I think synthetic data allows you to bridge some of those gaps where you're making assumptions, and sometimes they can be really, really flawed based on the kind of companies you're using to get the data or the internal data that you're pulling on. So I think there's a great opportunity there, but as with normal data, you have to be aware of that kind of bias, I think.
I agree with that. I was listening to a podcast yesterday about this very thing, and it suggested that the big AI, OpenAI and Google, etc., they have run out of data apparently, and they are looking at synthetic data. But that was exactly the sort of I guess that's the call out, which is the confirmation bias and getting it's sort of AI eating itself. That doesn't sound good to me. I think we should apply a layer of, I suppose, caution there, because there's nothing like sampling in the real world.
I do want to move us on a little bit beyond AI. There are lots of technologies out there that are shiny and new and interesting. One of them that, as I mentioned earlier, was talked about previously was sort of the metaverse or VR and AR. This was such a big thing a few years ago that Facebook changed to Meta, which, I don't know, do people still call it Facebook? Sometimes I do. On the other hand, Apple has come out with its Vision Pro this year, so there's definitely movement in this space. I'm just curious, I think, Sean, you talked previously about looking through with all these shiny new things through the lens of how it might change consumer behavior, marketing behavior, and also like business behavior. And to me, this is a tech that is a bit more consumer and potentially business facing. I'm curious, what do you make of this? Is there going to be a renaissance for metaverse or AR/VR, do you think?
I think there will be. Whether that's any time soon or not, I don't honestly know. I think it's safe to say that what Apple launched in the Vision Pro is about as cutting edge as you can get when it comes to the technology and the hardware. And it's still not, they're not even promoting it as a consumer device. It's a professional device, it's for developers, it's to build the things that then hopefully make it become a bigger consumer device. So I think we're at least 3 to 5 years away from the technology being there. And then you've got to build all of the applications and the software and stuff on top of that. So I think it's still a way away, but at some point within our lifetimes, I think it will be a really big deal. But it's just not there yet. And essentially what everyone's trying to get to is that it's in glasses, and that you don't have to wear this big...
Or contacts.
Or contacts, ideally, or, well, maybe...
Yeah, that's okay.
But yeah, people don't want to be wearing these big headsets. They don't want to only be using them at home. This needs to be part and parcel of a ever-present AI assistant that's with you throughout your life, and that's the vision, but the technology is not there, and it won't be for a while.
You mentioned glasses. There are products, Meta has them with Ray-Ban. There's other examples where there are glasses, but they're a bit more limited. But they have an AI assistant in there, and they do have a camera. I'm curious from a brand perspective, Luke, what do you make of this in terms of an opportunity? Could you do a partner with like an influencer who's maybe got these on or something?
Yeah.
What are the creative opportunities?
It's difficult because you don't want to be... So sometimes we very purposefully create experiences that are just test and learns. We know that they're not going to. They're really helping us explore how consumers will respond. So we did something in VR with Activia, for example, like a gut health style campaign. We knew it would be fairly small, but actually it was more than about the influencers that we got to the event and getting people excited about it. I think for me, consumer application is always how practical is it? How is it going to change the consumer experience? And if it doesn't, then it's probably still in that nascent kind of, we're excited about it, they're not phase, which is the easy mistake you can fall into. I had people asking me in the corridors, 2 years ago, what we were doing with generative AI before it was really a fully formed concept, and before really we're where we are now, which is very much more tangible. So it's just it's just finding it. I think with all of these things, there's a cycle, right? AR had you talk about Renaissance, AR we've had it for 10 years, and really brands found it really difficult to use and really difficult to get value out of. Now you're seeing so many examples, from lenses to actual AR experiences, that are bringing brands to life, and we've got things like Pokemon Go, which just changed the landscape. So there is a cycle of, even when something's fully launched and has the tech and ideation behind it, it can still be a long time before brands go, okay, there's the catch, there's the hook. And that's what we kind of search for, to make sure that we're not just doing goofy things for the sake of it, which is an easy mistake to make, an expensive one as well, potentially.
Another one that had that hasn't had a renaissance yet, perhaps, but could, are NFTs. That was a big play. Everyone got involved, especially during the pandemic. You have laughter on stage, and that market has obviously crashed from where it was. But that said, there are still things like in-game microtransactions that sort of prove the model to some degree, sort of to what you're saying. And there just might be time needed to figure out how to use them. I mean, are NFTs going to have a renaissance, or what about the underlying technology behind them, the blockchain?
We have Evian NFTs, 5 for anybody that are interested, that we released 3 years ago, that are now worth about, I think, $0.005. So if anybody's interested, hit me up. Yeah. But yeah, there's a good example where we ran that test and learn, sold 5 of these kind of artist-inspired NFTs, but it was a small enough scale for us to not be over-indexed, right? I think at some point we looked at doing things like, I remember an AR consultancy, apologies if they're in the room, I don't think they're in the room, a metaverse consultancy saying to us that it would be a really cool thing for kids to be able to collect Alpro t-shirts in Fortnite. And again, there's just that disconnect, right? Kids don't want to collect Alpro t-shirts in Fortnite, so we need to then find the practical application for it.
Yeah, how do you find that balance? Dora, perhaps you have an interesting idea. I mean, when you're testing any new technology, how do you hedge?
I think the potential's worthwhile. I think that's what you're saying, right? And the testing is worthwhile. And we always take an approach of test and learn at Ozone. And if we can find a couple of resources to do that, great. And I think that's a good approach. If that can be embedded more generally into the business, even better. I think the blockchain technology, when I think about it from the publisher's perspective, it is interesting. I mean, NFTs aside, and I'm not an expert, so I'm not even going to try and go there. But when I do think about the blockchain, it was early, right? I actually remember, I'm slightly embarrassed by this, but I do remember being invited to speak on a panel on a yacht in Cannes in 2018 about the blockchain, and I knew nothing, and none of us did. But people came and listened to what I had to say, which is really, I don't know why. But five or even longer, 6 years later, I still, it's the same things I said then is probably still true now, which actually there is something in it. There's something about the decentralization aspect, which puts, the idea of direct to consumer without intermediaries. That's interesting. That's interesting for a brand. It's interesting for a publisher. Talking about publishers, the idea of creating sort of provenance of content as well.
Especially with generative AI, you can know exactly.
Yeah, if you care about, and hopefully everybody does, if you care about who created this content, is it factual? Do I know who the writer is? Do I know the brand who released it from a publishing perspective? That can be done on blockchain, and I think that's a really important aspect of it. And so from that angle, I think it actually could be really a key factor as we go forward with deep fake and things like that. Blockchain could solve some of that.
Totally good point. Another one further in the future, that's something that we haven't perhaps seen of, is quantum computing. I'm not going to act like I know anything about this topic, so I'm not going to say anything about it. But Sean, are we even close to breakthroughs in that technology? I mean, would that change anything? How revolutionary would that type of computing be? And also, what is it?
Best question.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you use the handheld?
Oh.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Is that better?
Excellent. Can I move? Yeah. Excellent. Are we close to breakthroughs in quantum computing? From a scientific point of view, absolutely, and they're happening all the time. And it will, again, it's one of those technologies that's got a lot of promise, but it's kind of out there a little bit. It is not going to impact any of our professional lives anytime soon. That's probably like a 20-year horizon, I think, before we start to see kind of bigger adoption of that kind of technology. There's just a lot of things that need to be solved around it before it gets anywhere near that. But when it does come, it is going to break a load of things. That's, again, it's a little bit like AI in the fact that it's going to be incredibly disruptive when it does come, because it's going to break encryption, for example. And it's scary when you start thinking about how much of our entire lives is based on encryption now, because everything is digital. And it will probably enable AI to go stratospheric, because its processing power and speed is just stuff that we've never really kind of seen before. But it's a long way away.
Not something to be anxious about just yet.
Yeah, look, I think even the most optimistic commentators are not thinking about it this decade, even in research labs. And it's hard to explain this, but quantum computers use atoms to kind of encode data, and the biggest quantum computer in the world is 50 atoms. It's tiny, and it has got to get to the scale of hundreds of thousands or millions of atoms before it can even start doing things that normal computers can do. And that will come, definitely will come, but it's a long way off.
I want to consider as well, we've only got a few minutes, I want to consider as well this sort of anti-shiny new thing movement, if I may call it that way. There's niche cottage industries sort of coming up about people that want to ditch their smartphone, that don't want to deal with any of these technologies. I guess the overall question I would have is, should we consider those people as well? I mean, how do you target people that, are tech-averse, let's say, especially when it comes to branding, when you're chasing after, testing lots of different things? How do you speak to people that obviously have no idea what quantum computing is, let alone a lot of these other technologies? Luke, perhaps you have an idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because it flows through to a couple of areas. So data privacy, for example, you've got people now that want to stay off the grid, right? So the problem we've had is everything we do now is predicated around people that are on the grid. So we've forgotten, in a certain, there's the head of paid over there that will kill me today, but I think there are sometimes we miss the mass market. If we're just marketing to, we have absolutely no idea who you are, what is our strategy here, what's our media strategy? So it's probably something we need to lean into more, and it's the same thing with those kind of tech adverts. I saw somebody with a flip phone the other day on a bus, and it shook me to my core. And I just thought, I can't process this, I can't really deal with it. I guess it depends whether it gets a certain amount of traction, right? If it does become the case that people are moving into the woods and getting flip phones, then it's something we need to face into. It's definitely growing because it can feel really overwhelming in a world of notifications and targeting and your data being spread at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's overwhelming, and you can see why people just go, you know what, I want to cut all this out. And I think if it hits critical mass, then we need to face into it. But at the moment, luckily, it's just that guy on the bus.
I suppose there's niches that also want to look at VR and AR, just as there are niches that want to have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, still really important.
Yeah, we've got time for one last question. We talked a huge number of new technologies today, and how they might impact our industry. But again, it sort of speaks to what you were talking about a little bit, Luke, earlier. How do you balance the need to test and learn with the need to not spend too much money testing and learning because your NFTs might, lose value, or because people aren't in VR metaverse gaming for more than a day to look at your product, let's say, and we'll talk about that tomorrow at our event. What's the calculation that needs to be made? And I suppose let's start with Luke and maybe come back to Dora.
I think it's setting a certain percentage aside. It's saying, this is my test and learn capability. This is where I really want to break the system, see what sticks, but actually maintaining your core principles and not falling into the just chasing after shiny new things and investing all of your mental energy into it. I've noticed that in a lot of these areas, the core competency, our core marketing competency can sometimes be eroded by just that fact that we're just obsessed with the metaverse or NFTs or whatever the latest thing is. And it's not helped by like our boards asking us these kind of questions. So I think it's just important to have that really secure core in saying we don't touch the core, but we have this capacity to do new and innovative things at the same time so we can stay relevant.
Sean?
I think that things are changing so fast and there's so much disruption in marketing now that I think 100% should be on test and learn. I just think that we need to get into the mindset that we need to constantly be experimenting. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to have marketing money invested in areas that we know are going to perform, but there's going to be elements of that need to be tested constantly. And so I think 100% should be in test and learn, really. I think everything should be looked at as an experimentation in marketing now. So I have a slightly different take on it.
Dora, last word.
I'm more aligned with Sean, I think, in particular simply because Ozone is 6 years old and we are a technology business and everything that we do is looking to the future, doing it better, creating more efficiency in our workday and also in outcomes for our publishers and outcomes for our brands. And so that test and learn, like I said, in terms of embedding it into the business, it's kind of core, I think.
Well, that's a great way to end it. Will everyone join me in thanking our wonderful panel?